They dug up a stupid joke from 2017. I hadn't thought about it in years until a Twitter storm screamed my name. I don't remember the punchline, but I felt the vestiges of its humor slip into something sinister, twisted by context, warped by social media's insatiable hunger for outrage. The mob was sharpening its pitchforks, thirsting for a spectacle that would erase my existence. I was scrolling mindlessly, numb to the world, when the screen flashed with notifications. My heart sank. The betrayal stung harder than I anticipated. People I thought knew me, friends, acquaintances, had turned. Their voices echoed in a digital lynch mob, voracious for blood even as they claimed morality. A joke had transformed me from a person into an embodiment of their self-righteous anger. Innocence morphed into disbelief. Logic shattered in the face of a feral public. No truth mattered, only the hunt. They wanted outrage. I owed them nothing. Silence crept in where frantic chatter had once thrived. The quiet was deafening, reverberating with what I could not say. I began plotting. The anger simmering beneath the surface wasn't blind rage. It was control. I understood society now. Every keystroke, every reaction carefully calibrated. I'd never bothered to be a part of their game before, but now I would learn their scripts and replay my role on my terms. I deleted my social media apps, not in shame, but in strategic retreat. To vanish, not to hide. I nestled in the shadows, studying the cancelers. I observed their patterns, the way they danced on their stages of moral superiority, patting each other on the back while wielding their hashtags like weapons. What they hadn't realized was that, by handing me this opportunity, they'd drawn a map, a blueprint for revenge. They thought they could silence me, but they'd awakened a different force. I refused to apologize. I refused to divert my gaze. What they wanted was for me to kneel. I would not give them the satisfaction. I started rebuilding, quietly crafting a new identity under the radar. No more jokes. No more vulnerability. Just a calculated pursuit of consequence. Each connection I made was a thread in a web, intricately woven to ensnare the very machine that tried to obliterate me. Because I wasn't just seeking vengeance, I was forging a lesson in humility for those who thought they could manipulate me. Outrage may have driven them, but it was purpose that would propel me forward. I became the architect of consequences, aware that the strength of my silence was a power they couldn't comprehend. The tables would turn, and when they did, they wouldn't hear my roar. They'd only feel my absence. The minutes stretched into hours. Each tick of the clock felt like a reminder of the growing void left in the wake of betrayal. My phone lay face down, silenced, as if that could shield me from the storm. I didn't need to look at the screen to know the notifications were relentless. Sponsors vanished. Friends stopped calling. The silence was louder than the accusations, a haunting echo that reverberated through the empty halls of my life. What they didn't comprehend was the metamorphosis occurring inside me. Confusion, once a tangled web, hardened into quiet rage. Betrayal doesn't just hurt, it reveals who people truly are. Truth dies in the shadows of perception. I was no longer just a victim snared in their theater of outrage. I was a spectator, dissecting the performance with a surgeon's precision. I began to understand the mechanics of this mock trial, how each keyboard warrior wrapped themselves in the robes of righteousness while brandishing their hashtags like swords. Each comment and retweet I observed illuminated their desperate search for validation through my demise. Calculated cruelty disguised as a virtuous crusade. I took mental notes, crafting a blueprint that would serve me later. In the denial that followed their onslaught, I found clarity. These people who once laughed with me now stood ready to cast the stones. Their smiles had morphed into sneers, their camaraderie transformed into complicity. I had been a fool to share laughter with those who craved outrage more than honesty. They would never admit it, but I understood. Morality was a fleeting facade, and they wore it like a costume, always ready to change with the next trending topic. As I withdrew, I steered clear of social media, not out of shame, but strategic dissociation, to vanish on my terms. They craved a show, but I would give them obscurity. I began to compose my comeback not in public outrage, but in fine strokes of meticulous planning. The stage they built for me, a stage for my condemnation, would soon find itself crumbling under the weight of my own design. Days piled upon one another like logs in a funeral pyre, each moment propelling me closer to my new identity. I reached out to unseen networks, threads connecting beneath layers of anonymity, weaving a tapestry of influence that eluded their eager scrutiny. No spotlight, just quiet connections forged under cover of darkness. They thought they could silence me. They had unleashed an architect of consequences instead. By the time the mob realized the depth of their mistake, I would already have redefined the game. Outrage might fuel their fire, but my calm was the spark that would ignite the reckoning. In the silence, I was sharpening. In the shadows, I was crafting my return, armed with the knowledge that perception, once wielded like a weapon, could become a deadly instrument of my own design. The room felt colder, yet the weight inside me grew heavier. I immersed myself in shadows, the once vibrant colors of my life muted. Uncertainty became a dense fog that wrapped around my thoughts. I lay low, letting time stretch and breathe, using the silence as my training ground. I knew the world expected me to react, a visceral scream, a desperate plea for justice. Instead, I twisted that expectation into a weapon. I severed ties with my digital life, not out of fear, but as a tactical retreat. The apps vanished from my phone like ghosts, each sleek icon gone, each button pushing back a tide of noise. I found solace in the stillness, the quiet space needing no validation. They wanted a performance. I offered them vacancy. Isolation became my ally. I scoured the dark corners, uncovering forgotten channels and neglected networks. Information was currency, and I mined it. I studied their language, those who'd traded empathy for outrage. They reveled in the spectacle, but I viewed them through a lens of cold clarity. Predictable, volatile, self-righteous crusaders donning masks of virtue. While they strutted on their stages, I remained just out of sight. Every hashtag, every retweet revealed something deeper: phone numbers, affiliations, even insecurities hidden beneath bravado. I took mental snapshots, each detail piecing together the intricate puzzle of their lives, their motivations. They believed they were untouchable, protected by the shield of anonymity. I was about to show them how easily that shield could shatter. With nimble fingers, I cultivated a digital garden under an alias. Connections forged quietly in back channels, each thread a potential snare. I reached out unnoticed. Creators, influencers, journalists who thrived on whispers rather than roars. They would become my eyes and ears. I invested small, comfortable enough to lull them into trust. In this silence, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I no longer craved the spotlight. It was a consolation prize. the unmistakable badge of desperation. I shaped my new existence quietly, breathing life into a plan that pulsed in the dark. Conversations with allies began to swirl around the narrative they deemed untouchable, the punchline of a 2017 joke now dripping with poison. They thought they held the moral high ground. They thought they had staked their claim. But I was weaving an approach that acknowledged their delusions while carefully constructing a reckoning. I readied myself, poised behind calm and calculated silence. They would not prepare for my return. I would move like a shadow, striking where their vision faltered. I'd orchestrate a lesson from their misjudged conclusions, a demonstration not born of anger, but of surgical precision. They may have thought they'd won this round, but I was just getting started. I would turn their noise into my symphony of retaliation, and they would wonder how they had overlooked the silence that preceded me. I would become the nightmare they never knew to fear, an architect of consequences, hidden and patient, until the moment arrived to deliver justice. I awaited that moment, welcoming the thrill of calculated revenge, my silence drawn taut, ready to snap. They wanted outrage, and I began to see how the game was played. The cancelers weren't just rabid wolves. They were a herd, coordinated in their search for a scapegoat, thriving on the thrill of the hunt. I watched them closely, taking mental notes as they paraded their moral superiority on social media, farming validation from one another like farmers harvesting in a ripe season. Their outrage was predictable. They transformed me, an innocuous joke from 2017, into a caricature of heinous intent. Each retweet was a stone hurled, every comment a dagger piercing through my character. Yet beneath the fervor of their collective fury, I sensed their cracks. The performers weren't flawless. No, they bore weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and insecurities hidden beneath layers of bravado, just waiting for me to exploit. I became an analyst of their moves and countermoves, dissecting the ebb and flow of their outrage like a scientist in a lab. A tweet would catch fire, and I noted the rabble-rousing hashtags. Their chants echoed for justice while their eyes lit with the thrill of their own power. They acted as if they were the arbiters of truth, fueled by a self-righteous anger that left no room for dissent. Empathy was a relic that had all but vanished from their lexicon, replaced by this twisted sense of moral execution. They were chasing applause, each click and share feeding their egos, and I realized that they were addicts, addicted to the high of outrage and the dopamine rush of public scorn. I quietly toyed with the dichotomy of power, always 2 steps ahead. Manipulation became my enterprising muse. As they reveled in their orchestrated performances, I laid the groundwork for my own. Every connection I made, every secret handshake in back channels, became the scaffold I would need to reconstruct my stage. They were digital performers, dancing to the rhythm of moral outrage. I was the composer, watching through the soundproof glass while my symphony turned to metered expectations. I penned their narrative in silence, carving paths in the shadows where their light could not reach. Invitations extended under aliases, conversations ignited in dimly lit rooms. These were my steps, calculated moves aimed at dismantling the very machine that tried to erase me. Their applause became my soundtrack of focus, a reminder that every act they took was a cue for my response. Soon, the weight of my restraint transformed from mere survival into strategy. I understood their game. They would never see me as I truly was. I would no longer be the punchline. They would become the punchline of a narrative I orchestrated, one where my comeback would unfold like a tightly wound clock. each tick holding the promise of consequences they couldn't fathom. I reveled in that certainty. Invisible, I would rise, my silence reverberating with an echo that demanded recognition. They thought they wielded the sword, but I was drawing the outline for the battlefield where I would vanquish their expectations, one silent step at a time. The architect of consequences was preparing to unveil his design, and it would be a lesson written not with apologies, but with cold, calculated deliberation. In their frenzy, they had forgotten the most powerful weapon was not in the volume of their cries, but in the precision of a quiet plan. They sought my confession, the penance for a joke etched in the fading memory of 2017. As their virtual torches illuminated the night, I remained cloaked in shadows, consciously withholding every apology they craved. Their demand was rooted in a certain currency, a contrived market of remorse, thriving on public humiliation and tearful admissions. I wouldn't trade in the currency they set. In the stillness of my self-imposed exile, I began to alchemize my shame into something potent. How deliciously ironic. They believed they could grind me to dust. Yet I stood, a stone amongst shifting sands. With every shriek of outrage, I felt my strength solidify. This was the path to resilience, a rejection of their narrative, a refusal to don the shackles they expected me to wear. In their frenzy, they embraced the illusion of power. Each slapdash hashtag served as a flimsy lifeboat in a tempest of righteousness. They played a game of righteous indignation, blinded by their mania, unaware that I was mapping the very terrain they tread. Each comment, each retweet, was a blaring siren revealing their vulnerabilities. I could see cracks in their sanctimonious facade, beautiful fractures of doubt waiting for a shift in the light. I had become a silent architect, crafting my own narrative, meticulously designed to spiral from the ashes of their impotent fury. Their manufactured outrage was no more than a candle flickering in a storm. I was the stillness of the eye, observing their chaos unfold, waiting for my moment to turn the tide. My fingerprints would remain unseen, skillfully navigating the landscape they thought they controlled. Outside, their clamor heated up, their need for blood simmering over. But inside, I was an ocean of calm. I learned to channel their energy, expelling every negative emotion through the sieve of my intention. I studied the patterns of their outrage like an entomologist analyzing insects, vulnerable, frantic creatures anticipating a consequence that would never come, while blind to the predator lurking above. It was thrilling, almost poetic, the way I refused to engage. While they tallied my sins, I carved pathways. Apologies were meant for those desperate for forgiveness. Instead, I wielded silence like a blade, cutting through the noise. Their attempts to corner me only solidified my directive. They wanted me to show remorse, to admit defeat. I simply refused to take the stage they constructed for my downfall. In a calculated manner, I transformed the energy directed at me into an empowerment that surged within. It ignited a quiet defiance, feeding my resolve. I would not bend. I would not break. Instead, I would remain the unseen hand guiding the course of this chaotic play. They thought they had written the script, but I had become its editor, revising the narrative with every deflected insult. And so, I submerged deeper into the shadows. The darkness became my sanctuary, my canvas, allowing me to paint my plans while the mob raged above me, ignorant of the trap I had set. They would continue to flail against the boundaries of my existence. But as the architect of this consequence, I silently initiated the countdown to my final act. They basked in their misguided glory, not yet aware that I had already turned the wheel of this relentless cycle, setting my revenge into motion. The connections I'd woven in the shadows were beginning to bear fruit. Each conversation hummed with potential, a quiet undertow moving beneath the surface. The thrill of strategizing in secret fueled my resolve. But just as I thought I was safely obscured, a flicker of disquiet whispered through the dark. One afternoon, while sifting through documents under my alias, I received a message from a contact, a consultant who had been gathering intel on the cancellers. "Someone's been asking questions," he warned, the words echoing in my head like a gunshot in a quiet room. A chill wormed its way down my spine. Naively, I believed I had maneuvered beyond their reach. I dismissed my rising anxiety, but it clawed at my composure. I'd underestimated the tendrils of their outrage. They were relentless, always seeking out the ones who slipped silently from the limelight. Wouldn't they savor the revelation of my secret life? The prospect of exposure set my pulse racing as I scanned the message again. "They want to know who's behind the backlash," he continued, his tone laced with both caution and urgency. My mind momentarily spiraled into chaos, 100 scenarios flashing before my eyes, each embarrassment more agonizing than the last. Yet panic was my enemy. I couldn't afford it, not now. I deepened my breath, reminding myself that fear could not be the currency of my existence. Instead, I fueled that energy, transforming it into precision, a tool for recalibration. A weaker person would falter. I would adapt. I entangled myself further into the web of aliases. Every detail of my life became impenetrable, each connection a shadowy thread strengthening my cover. I dissected my network, searching for potential leaks, scrutinizing every recent contact and every conversation that lingered. Nothing would be left to chance. While I was drawn further into this vortex of suspicion, I felt a primal determination emerge. These cancellers were not infallible. Their world was built on the fragility of the furious. I began plotting how I would leverage their overreach against them. I wouldn't just weather the storm. I would reshape the winds of misunderstanding to my advantage. Each doubt that bubbled to the surface was merely another element, sharpening my focus, honing my resolve. No one would take my plans from me. My enemy was underestimated and predictable. I peered inward, gathered my strength, and quieted the trepidation clawing at my throat. I extinguished my doubts. Pain was a diversion, but pain could also lead to a sharper blade. I contacted my consultant again. "We need to tighten operations," I instructed, voice steady, my mind a shield. "Stay ahead of them. Get me information and contacts. Let them think we're reactive. We'll plan a counterstrike." It was time to gather the weapons I would unleash, not to retaliate in fury, but with calculated precision. Suddenly, all those quiet nights spent learning the patterns of the mob felt necessary, inherent. I was no longer merely watching. I was now a participant. The threat of exposure galvanized me, provoking the raw adrenaline of preparation. In this dance of shadows, there was no audience, no applause, only the dark, fertile ground on which I would plant my revenge. Every heartbeat resounded with purpose, and I welcomed the weight of the impending confrontation. I was reloading my resolve, not with blind anger, but with a strategy that echoed in the silence. The blade was sharpening, and I was ready to strike again. The world had waited. The world remained oblivious. It thrived on chaos, feeding on the frenzy sparked by my absence. My silence became the canvas upon which I began painting my return. A return wrapped in shadows, hidden but profound. As weeks rolled into months, the cacophony surrounding my name started to fade, like a dying ember from a once raging fire. But little did they know, I had gathered the ashes and held the powder of their downfall like a soldier ready for battle. I knew the machinations of the mob now, watched them spin their tales while I remained the ghost in their machine. They believed I'd vanished. I preferred to think of it as recalibrating their equations, a remapping of their assumptions. It was time to seize control, not through loud proclamations, but through the subtle precision of calculated movements. In the quiet corners of digital oblivion, new connections teased at the edges of possibility. Under the alias I'd carefully crafted, I had diverted streams of influence, tapping into a powerful force lurking beneath the surface of the very waters where I had once been drowned. Funding avenues, initiating conversations, aligning myself with creators and thinkers who were cunning yet unnoticed, a collective of disenchanted souls waiting for the right direction. It was no mere gathering, it was an awakening. Together, we were the unheard chorus waiting for the conductor to raise his baton. It was during one of these late-night meetings, cloaked in anonymity, that the plan solidified into shape. I learned of a promising startup, an innovative tech company that had risen to prominence in the very media landscape that had once spearheaded my cancellation. With quiet precision, I made my moves, placing strategic investments that felt untraceable yet calculated. Little by little, I carved a pathway to control, digesting their knowledge, their weaknesses, and their assets. As the public remained fixated on gossip and self-righteousness, I lurked behind the curtains, awaiting the perfect opportunity. They danced on the precipice of the moral high ground, blind to the fact that I was not retreating from the battle. I was fortifying my empire in silence, stepping into the realm they'd thought was theirs alone. Finally, it happened. The announcement came. The startup was acquiring the very publication that had so gleefully orchestrated my public execution. The press release launched like a meteor, no one suspecting the hand that had guided it, hidden under layers of misdirection. They'd sown the seeds of their downfall, and I had watered them in secret. As they celebrated their hollow victories, my investment bore fruit. The publication I'd targeted began a controlled dismantling, its reputational frailty exposed for all to see. Factions within the organization turned against themselves, whispers echoing through the corridors of power as the air thickened with distrust. To the mob, I was invisible, a phantom lurking just beyond their reach, silently sowing the seeds of chaos among their ranks. It was satisfying, not because I craved vindication through applause, but because I knew the structure of their power was crumbling. Each board meeting turned into a brawl of accusations and infighting, while I remained outside the fray. As I watched the publication's influence melt away like ice under the sun, I felt a rare sense of justice wash over me. Power doesn't need volume, it requires incisive action. My moves were surgical, quiet. I reveled in this newfound dominance, a victory woven through silence rather than shouts of triumph. In this arena, where the mob expected a fight, they only found themselves grappling with their own disarray, blissfully unaware of the architect orchestrating the dismantling of their ill-conceived morality. I became the shadow that hung over them, the reminder of consequences they failed to foresee. Their reactions echoed through the digital landscape, cries of betrayal resonating back into silence. Only now, the silence belonged to me. Each day, I crushed the remnants of their faux righteousness underfoot, calculating their demise while I built a fortress for the few who dared to stand beside me. The return they didn't see coming wasn't just about revenge. It was power reclaimed. Each whispered accusation that had once roared now seemed impotent, scattered by the winds of a reckoning they never expected. As I reflected on the methods and strategies that had led me here, I recognized an undeniable truth. In this game, it was never about revenge. It was about redefining the parameters of influence. The architect of consequences had returned, and the world they had built on outrage began to unravel, thread by delicate thread. I was no longer the punchline of their joke. I was the shadow drawing tighter around their original sin, and all they could do was watch as their carefully constructed narrative crumbled. The collapse heralded, not by victories, but by my precise, deliberate silence. They swear they don't remember. The same voices, once so eager to cast stones, now scramble to rewrite their own narratives, their features flickering like shadows under the dim light of memory. When the dust began to settle and the noise of outrage turned muffled, they clutched at their frayed tapestries of righteousness, stitching pieces together to shield themselves from accountability. They are the cowards of this digital age, performing indignation while desperately seeking cover. Friends and peers who reveled in my downfall now wore masks of amnesia, some casting me as a villain, others as a mere figment of their imaginations. I watched them silently from the periphery, my grip steady, the tension coiling tighter. The precision of their denial is stunning, a collective amnesia shaped by self-preservation. I never thought you were that person. Their laughter, once warm with camaraderie, now twists bitter as they attempt to distance themselves from the fallout that lingers like an unwelcome ghost. A select few come forward, tentative and shamed, groveling in their newfound guilt, offering faux reconciliations wrapped in apologetic words. They think their carelessness can be washed away with contrition like dust from old boots. They regret not the harm done, but the lack of foresight to predict the reckoning that would fester beneath their self-righteous posturing. I can feel their fear spiking even in the most calculated of their gestures. They are frightened. They should be. Their voices once roared with condemnation, brandishing their hashtags like sharpened blades, eager for blood, now tremble with uncertainty as if the ground beneath them is ready to consume them whole. Each attempt to rewrite history, each casual dismissal of the past, is a testament to their shallow morality. They are mere performers in a theater where the audience no longer believes their act. I observe them, a spectator to their small, tragic delusions. I feel a slight disgust rise within me, a flicker of irritation for my erstwhile comrades who exchanged laughter for condemnation. But mostly I feel indifference, a stark contrast to the naivete I once possessed. They no longer matter. The play they concocted, the outrage they so eagerly fed, has become their prison, and I hold the key. Outrage was their weapon. Silence is mine. In this quietude, I sense the power of foresight, the thrill of my anticipation as I watch them stumble. Every day, I am reminded of how low they will bow to salvage their mirage of virtue. It thickens the air, anticipation hovering like storm clouds before a tempest, ready to break. I have come to embody everything they fear. I, the architect of consequences, will not fight them. I will let their anxiety gnaw at their insides while I remain, still and poised, the slashing knife above their throats, waiting for the moment to slice through their pretense with a calculated motion. I am no longer just a victim in their story. I am now the serpent in the garden, hidden yet undeniably present. They don't know it yet, but their farce is nearing its end. Their storm is on the horizon, and I will be waiting. They wanted outrage, yet here I stood, cloaked in silence, threading the final pieces of my design together. The stage I had meticulously crafted lay just beneath the surface, a hiding place, an execution chamber for the very narrative that sought to eliminate me. The canvas was set, the colors muted, but the intensity was sharpened, poised for action. Concealed within the folds of this chaos, I became a snare, awaiting the moment my plan would snap shut, ensnaring those who had wronged me. My network had grown vast and intricate, a labyrinth of aliases and murmurings rivaling the very clamor that sought to bury me. I had become a silent protector, an invisible hand funding the defense of those unjustly targeted, those brave few longing for justice in a world hungry for blood. Each lawyer's retainer I funded unveiled a deeper layer of their hypocrisy, exposing their pretense while I collected tangible proof of my mission. Revenge born not of malice, but principle. I watched quietly, calibrating my next move. Each whisper of the cancellers, their predictability, their arrogance, painted a clearer picture than even they understood. They were already fracturing beneath the weight of self-importance, unaware of the fate they had sown for themselves. Their torches had dimmed. They lacked the foresight to see the backlash looming on the horizon. Month after month passed in calculated quiet. I observed social media's shifting tides, each storm of outrage sparking a flurry of new targets for their ruthless fervor. Yet, under the gauze of their rage, I found warmth and purpose in my work. For every joke they wielded as a weapon, I nurtured empathy behind the scenes, defending the vulnerable who resisted kneeling. As they sent out their bans, seeking fresh blood, a profound certainty settled over me. I wasn't merely collecting debts, I was restoring balance. Keeping score isn't bitterness, it's memory with purpose, a ledger recording the injustices laid bare under blinding lights. My recollections morphed into a resolve sharper than any blade they could brandish. They thought they hunted me. They did not see the hunter's patience burning within me. I inhaled deeply, focusing on the tableau ahead. The final dimensions of my strategy fell into place, each piece clicking like a chamber in a well-crafted firearm. What was sustenance for the cancellery, unchallenged outrage, was merely the fuse that lit their doom. The moment approached when their arrogance would meet its reckoning, and I would watch from the shadows as they toppled, one by one, my hand meticulously orchestrating the fall. I had become the architect, not just of revenge, but of a new narrative. They would emulate the righteousness they craved, only to find themselves entangled in the trap I set with purposeful precision. Every semblance of power they once held would fracture, exposing their cowardice for all to witness, sniveling figures stripped of their self-righteous masks. In this moment, I felt the breath of destiny at my back, the silence pregnant with anticipation. I would remain the unseen force, poised above their tumult, weaponizing my obscurity. No desperate cries for acknowledgement or pleas for recognition. Just a calm resolve that hung thick in the air, like the stillness before a storm. I had prepared and refined my approach. The atmosphere shifted, tension stretching tight. They had painted the walls. Now I would erase their narrative, replacing it with one of my own design. A new play would unfold, pen to score, centering on the chorus of humility and retribution. I, the silent puppeteer, would draw the strings with a deft hand, manipulating the plot that would unfold in whispered tones. They had underestimated the architect among them, thinking me a mere casualty of their performance. My power built not through spectacle, but through constructed shadows and whispers, embedded deep in the fabric of their world. I watched them spin, unaware. I had become their shadow, an image of consequence, quietly moving to reset the scales until that final breath brought them collectively to their knees, unaware that their time was running out. It was now clear. I didn't merely survive. I thrived in anticipation. I would exhale the final breath that would topple their monument of pretense, greeted not with derision, but with the silence of those who didn't know the game had already changed. My legacy would be one of cunning, and as the curtain lifts on this carefully orchestrated performance, they would finally grasp the depth of their dismissal. I watched as the walls of their self-righteousness crumbled brick by brick, my outlines of revenge coiling tightly around them like a serpent poised to strike. Every assertion they made, every bombast about justice, became another dagger pointed at their own chests, and they remained blissfully unaware that they were dancing on a knife's edge. Their outrage was an electrical storm, crackling through the air, charging the atmosphere with an energy I had been cultivating in silence. It was an exquisite pleasure observing the slow unraveling of the cancellers. Their accusations echoed back at them, confusion lighting their eyes like flickers of a dying flame. The words they wielded turned to ash in their mouths as their own hypocrisy clawed at their throats. "You're next," they had whispered, and now I relished the sound of their own forebodings reverberating back, distorted. News outlets erupted in this new scandal, a fresh joke taken out of context, another target marked for digital lynching. As the first waves of outrage rolled in, I felt the air grow thick with tension, a tautness that left the mob unsettled. They readied their pitchforks, itching to crucify another life. But this time, there was hesitation. The media hesitated. They had learned. The realization wasn't immediate, but it unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. The influential voices I had pacified, though enshrouded in anonymity, had forewarned them of the might that lay hidden beneath my silence. Each publication felt their conscience stir. They began to see the blade, my blade, sharply highlighting the absurdity of their vendetta. And in that moment of vulnerability, my satisfaction swelled, cold and unwavering. I reveled in the art of manipulation, the precision of my design. I had not merely conjured a return from the ashes, I had orchestrated the very implications of their downfall. The thrill of power, tempered by control. No blood on my hands, no need for theatrics. Just a deft hand guiding their tumult toward its fateful conclusion. The richest irony was their self-doubt, swirling now where once there was a torrent of arrogance. Doubt seeped into their minds like smoke through a broken window, thick, suffocating, and persistent. What if we were wrong? Echoed in their meetings. What if we're seen as the villains now? Each question was another step deeper into their labyrinth of despair, uncertainty towering over them like a dark cloud. The facade of moral superiority began to fracture, revealing the fragile egos behind the digital masks. Silence isn't surrender, it's sharpening. And in that sharpened stillness, I felt the weight of every decision gently coalesce into a final act. My network had become more than a web. It was a fortress, encompassing like-minded souls who had suffered similar fates, rising with me to forge a legacy that spoke of defense, not vengeance. Each naysayer I had funded, Each whisper I had amplified returned from the shadows to stand beside me. I shaped a tableau where accountability reigned and self-righteousness crumbled. Watching them flounder was clinical, the precision of their vulnerability intoxicating. They sought outrage at my expense, yet their own choice of performance pushed them further into the fire, their cries for justice fueling their demise. Now, their path diverged, spiraling into chaos they had once heralded. I bore witness to their scattered defenses, a silhouette watching the tinder ignite under the weight of their own concoction. "Who are we now?" they asked, voices trembling under the weight of their doubt. Was it justice? Or have we just become our own demons? I smirked, their Frankensteinian creation turning against them. They were not just losing control, they were losing themselves. Each declaration of moral high ground transformed into a death knell. The chatter of their keyboards morphed into frantic scratching, desperate to rewrite a narrative they no longer controlled. Suddenly, I felt it, an alluring sense of calm, a subtle embrace woven from these threads they had left untended. In that hushed moment, I understood fully. I had not just emerged from the fire of their outrage. I had become the architect of consequences. I shaped breaths, moved shadows, all while they clawed at the air, groping for anything solid to grasp. This was the reckoning they never saw coming, a scalding reflection of their insecurities, thrust sharply back at them. I sat back, an observer cloaked in the shadows. As the embers of their downfall glowed brightly, the once virulent mob shivered, suddenly aware that their own stages were crumbling beneath them, their voices silenced, not by lack of fervor, but by the very consequences they had crafted for others. And so I prepared, patiently drawing breath, savoring the taste of their confusion. I would not strike recklessly. Control is often silent. I remained their unseen sword, poised to showcase that true power needs no name, no applause, only the echoed silence of ash falling from the heights of misplaced outrage. I had become the silent executioner, watching and waiting, for soon they would come to learn. The architect of their consequence had drawn a map of retribution, one that shifted beneath their feet as they tried to find their place among the fallen. The sun melted into the horizon, spilling a palette of burnt oranges and deep purples across the sky. But I found no joy in the beauty of the skyline. I sat alone in my house, a solitary figure juxtaposed against the backdrop of everything I had meticulously dismantled and rebuilt. Outside, the world buzzed on, unaware or perhaps chose to ignore the profound silence that now defined my existence. I had come a long way from the raw, visceral pain of a 2017 joke resurrected like a zombie to feast on my reputation, yet none of it felt like victory. Number victory was performance on a grand stage, adorned with accolades. This was merely a quiet reckoning, a solitude that slithered through the cracks of what once was. The thrill of revenge had faded, replaced with an odd sense of reflection, empty yet resonant in its clarity. I spent those long nights gathering the pieces of my life once shattered by the mob, piecing them together under careful hands. The intimidation they sought to impose on me had transformed into a rallying cry for others. And though the architect's blueprint had come to fruition, I could still hear the echoes of betrayal reverberating in my mind. Had it ever been worth it? They had once taken delight in tearing down my walls. Now they were the ones dismantled, each clamor falling silent. And yet here I remained, enveloped in a resolute calm. I had become the shadow that lurked in the background of accountability, removing the rancid planks that propped up their self-constructed pedestal. No one would see me coming, a phantom who orchestrated justice from the dark, unseen yet profoundly impactful. As night cloaked the remnants of the day, I thought not of revenge but of a different kind of closure. The chains of their accusations had been heavy, but I had mastered them, grappling with every taunt, each jeer a sculptor chipping away at an inseparable part of who I once was. I had emerged, yes, but rebirth does not always mean resurrection into the light. Sometimes it means fading into the mosaic shadows, a bold transition into obscurity. I realized then, as I watched the colors of the day surrender to the night, that no longer was I the hunted, but the hunter become architect. They remained blind to their blind spots, ever unassuming of the force manipulating their fates, and I found comfort in the fact that my hands, once tied, now wielded quiet power. But the beauty of this reverie struck a merciless blow. Had they forfeited the chance for understanding? Had I written them off in my pursuit of consequence? The weight of their performative outrage lingered, sure, even in my triumph. The consistency of their cowardice served as a reminder. They never asked for forgiveness. Why offer it? The question sickened me as it settled heavily in the quiet corners of my mind. But I learned, as the sun settled and my life turned into nightfall, my path lay not in the clamor for recognition or the superficial acceptance from the lost souls who clung to their fading narratives. Completing this journey was not a matter of shouting louder to reclaim what they stole. It was about positioning myself as the architect of consequences, the fierce resistance against those who sought to trivialize my being. Underneath the soft whispers of victory, I heard the lesson distilled into clarity. Silence can be sharper than any accusation. I rose from my chair, my footsteps fading into the darkness of the hallway, edged with the distinct tang of resolve. Each step was my own, reverberating with an echo that vibrated quietly beneath the surface, retreating into the arms of my own reflection. No lingering desires for redemption or the shrill cries for justice. Just me, stronger and sharper, moving forward into oblivion, gracefully reminding myself that to cancel one's past isn't to obliterate it. It's to redefine its meaning. I closed the door, enveloping myself in the solitude of the unremarkable. As the last remnants of light faded away, so too did the clamor of revenge and suffocating outrage. What remained was not an ambition for forgiveness, but a tempest brewing within, a profound awareness that now it was time to leave. Just one last whisper hung in the air, a testament to the winding journey I had traversed in silence. You don't uncancel yourself by yelling louder. You do it by becoming the architect of consequences. And as I stepped out the door, I knew this chapter was closed. There would be no applause for the architect of their undoing, no final falling curtain, just the quiet stillness that lingered behind locked doors. This was my piece,